feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, another week on Open Line gets underway with a flying start. Mr. John Martignoni is in the house, apologist extraordinaire, ready to answer your questions at 1-800-585-9396. Toll free anywhere in North America, 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. Or you can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com. I'm Jack Williams. Elena Rodriguez produces the program. And your call screener is Mr. Matt Gubensky. Our host, as he is every Monday, the president and founder of the Bible Christian Society, the director of the Office of the New Evangelization and Stewardship for the Diocese of Birmingham and Alabama, and all-around great guy, Mr. John Martignoni. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm assuming that Elena took very good care of you in my absence last week.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Wait a minute.
She did a wonderful job. We missed you, though.
She's easier on the eyes. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, thank you.
For our radio audience, that's a benefit. 1-800-585-9396. We've got an email from Greg in Des Moines, my old stomping grounds, rather. I am sometimes discouraged about the state of poor catechesis in our church for young people. It's not just for young people, Greg, in some places. Not only does it seem like we're losing so many of our young people, but there does not seem to be much urgency on the part of many in religious life add to. Boy, this is not worded very well. Thanks for picking this one out, John.
Well, I understood what he was saying.
But there does not seem to be much urgency on the part of many in religion to add to recognize that kids don't understand the church's teachings on faith and morals in a way that is relevant and impactful to them. I know the saying, better to light a candle than curse the darkness, but what are the best responses to our current situation? And that's Greg in Des Moines.
Well, Greg, I can understand how you could be discouraged about the poor state of catechesis, and as Jack said, not just for young people, but throughout the church. It's getting better than it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early, what do you call this, OOs? Or
early aughts.
Early aughts. But so there are, large steps, big steps of improvement, but it's still nowhere near where it needs to be. And so, especially for the young people, because they are getting hammered when they go off to college by the Baptists, the evangelicals, the atheists, the materialists, secular humanists. Their professors are hammering them on their faith, professors who in many instances are atheists, are very hostile to any kind of faith, but in particular to the Catholic faith. So I agree with you 100%. I had a situation where I went and talked to a couple of classes at a high school bioethics classes, and the teacher, who was a nun, had asked me to come in and just, she wanted me to challenge them.
She was a sister.
A sister. Thank you. Nuns it's a technical thing. So
they'll correct you is the only reason I did.
So she said, I want you to challenge them with apologetics. So I asked these two classes, which comprised, it was probably, 40-some seniors between the two classes, about a fourth of the senior class. Just asked them two questions. And I said, okay, let's assume I'm an evangelical pastor. Everything I know, everything I claim comes from the Bible and the Bible alone. I said, you Catholics, what do you call your priest? They said, Father. I said, well, right here in the Bible it says, call no man father, Matthew 23. How do you answer that? And there was one stab at it, and that was quickly shot down. And no one can answer. So I said, okay, you failed that. I said, well, how many children did Mary have? And they said, one. I said, yeah, in fact, that's a dogma of your church, that Mary was a perpetual virgin and no other children other than Jesus, etc. And I said, but right here in Mark 6, verse 3, it says, well, are not these, is not this James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon and his brothers, and are not his sisters here? I said, the Bible, once again, contradicts your Catholic faith. How do you respond to that? Again, one fairly lame attempt. Well, we're all brothers and sisters. I said, yes, and the Bible uses the term in that broad respect in many places, but not here. It names 4 of his brothers. How do you... And silence. And the sister said, you are going to tell them the right answers, aren't you? She was getting kind of worried because these kids were clueless. And so I did explain it to them, and this one little girl afterwards just raised her hand, sitting right in front of me. She said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. She goes, I've been in Catholic schools for 12 years, and I've never been taught anything like this. Why aren't we taught this in the Catholic schools? And I took it to the head of the Catholic schools for that diocese and got absolutely nowhere. I think I don't know if it was pride or just, they don't need to know these things. The schools do a good job of teaching the what of the Catholic faith, but they don't teach the why, and neither do the PSR programs. And again, there are exceptions being made, and it's getting better, particularly in some of the Catholic colleges, but there's so much more that could be done, and hopefully as we go forward, the improvement we've seen will grow and grow and grow, and more in the Catholic education system, the catechesis will get up to a standard of where it needs to be.
And I hope Greg is volunteering to be part of that effort, because there's 2 sides to that coin.
Yes.
We need to be willing to make an effort ourselves and to get our children into situations where they learn
Absolutely, and we need to supplement the education, of the schools and the PSRs with what we teach them at home. And so, you have to be involved. Plus, you have to raise Cain with the Catholic educators, the DREs at the parishes you're at, the teachers and the principals and staff at any of the Catholic schools you're attending, your children are attending, the bishop of the diocese. Just, if necessary, become a pain in the neck and say, I'm sorry, but I want a good, solid Catholic education for my children so that when they go out into the world and get away from the house, they will be fully grounded in their faith.
1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number with your questions for John Martignoni. Straight ahead, we'll talk to Paul in Saginaw, Michigan, Raymond in Dallas, Texas, and we've got plenty of time for your phone calls at 1-800-585-9396. Open Line Monday with John Martignoni.
One major objection to theism is the problem of evil. Of the several different forms it takes, one is that the presence of evil is logically incompatible with God's existence. But this would only be true if either A, God is not powerful enough to bring good out of evil, or B, that there simply is no good that God can bring out of evil. In regard to the first, this cannot be because, as properly defined, God is infinite in power, and thus there is no good that God could not bring about. For the second horn of the dilemma, it's impossible for us who have finite minds and are limited by space and time to prove that there is no good that the infinite God can bring about. Therefore, the presence of evil is not logically incompatible with God. To learn more about this topic, visit our website, magicenter.com. I'm Carlo Broussard, apologist and speaker for the Magis Center, with your Magis Minute.
Podcasts of Open Line are available within 24 hours of live broadcast. Go to EWTN.com and click on Multimedia.
Hi, this is Jerry Usher. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-2 271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Remember to like EWTN Radio on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/EWTN Radio Network. That's facebook.com/EWTN Radio Network. To the phones we go. Paul is in Saginaw, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio, AM 1440 rather. Paul, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hey, how you doing today, guys?
Doing well, Paul. How about yourself?
Not too bad. John, I'm looking for your opinion and a little discussion, more so than an answer, about two prayers that we say. The first is about the act of contrition prayer before and after Vatican II, and the second is the profession of faith at Sunday Mass, where it talks a little bit about confession. But let me do the first one first. On the act of contrition prayer before Vatican II, it states, to confess my sins, to do penance, and that penance usually involves some kind of praying after confession. Now, that was replaced after Vatican II with to sin no more and to avoid the near occasions of sin. Would you want to comment on that? Do you think that's a good idea, replacing that first statement with that second statement?
Well,
also, James 5:16 says, confess and pray and you shall be saved.
Right. Here's the thing. It's if you took it just in isolation, the change would seem like, well, wait a minute, sin no more and avoid the near occasion of sin versus confessing my sins and doing penance via prayer primarily, but possibly other things as well. If it was completely, what the penitent did after confessing was up completely to just what the penitent said, the act of contrition. If that was the only guidance that the penitent got, then I would say, well, you might have a point. But the fact of the matter is that the priest has guidance in his role from the church as to what he is supposed to do in terms of handing out penance. And for the most part, it's handing out prayer, and it is handing out penance. It's not just, hey, go and avoid the near occasion of sin. No, the priest is essentially required to hand out penance because the sacrament involves the oral confession of your sins and doing penance. So if it was just we're relying solely on the act of contrition as the directions by which we go for this sacrament, then yes, I would say probably not a good thing to get rid of penance, but we're not relying solely on the act of contrition. The priest has a role in this too, and he is supposed to give them penance, and most of the time that penance is through prayer. Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Okay, let's go to the second one. On the profession of faith at Sunday Mass, there's a statement towards the end there that says, we believe in the confession of baptism for the forgiveness of our sins. What do you think of that statement there?
Does it say we believe in the confession
It says,
of
I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins.
Yeah, I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, correct.
Okay, what that's saying is, when you say, I confess one baptism, you're saying, I believe in one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, which in Scripture it talks about one faith, one baptism. What does baptism do? Baptism, it wipes away all sin. If you're baptized as a baby before you've committed any personal sin, then the stain of original sin that you have is wiped away. So that sin is wiped away. But if you're baptized as after the age of reason, so you've committed personal sins, then the stain of baptism, the stain of original sin is washed away through baptism. The stain of all personal sins is washed away through baptism, and the punishment due to any sins is washed away through baptism. So you are pure as the driven snow. So that's what it's talking about, the forgiveness of sins through baptism. Okay?
we don't have to go to confession as an adult after we've been baptized, and that washes away all our sins at that point in time?
Oh, no, not at all. That's not what it's saying at all. What it's saying is at the moment of your baptism, you are pure as the driven snow.
Okay.
But afterwards, if you commit sin, then you still have to go back to confession.
Still got to go back to confession.
Yep.
And this is why a lot of people in the early days of Christianity would put off baptism until near death.
Right. They would wait and wait and wait because they knew once they were baptized, hey, that's it. They're good to go. But that may not have worked out quite like they
I think
wanted.
John Wayne did that.
Well, he did. I don't know if he purposely did that or if he just wasn't convinced of it or felt the need for God in his life or something until he was on his deathbed. But so whatever the reason was, but yes, he did have a deathbed conversion.
Yeah, he said he was a cardiac Catholic.
Yeah, there you go.
Very good answers, John.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Paul. God bless. Have a great rest of your Advent. Next stop, Dallas, Texas. Raymond, listening on Guadalupe Radio AM 910. Raymond, what's your question today for John?
Well, I'm trying to form a good question for you guys on the radio. I guess the big theme would be the 27 books of the New Testament. I've heard that we have ascribed the names to them that we have, that they weren't originally on there.
Okay.
Like the Gospels, or even ascribing the name of John to the book of Revelation or Paul to Hebrews. I mean, we have ascribed names to these writings that maybe we shouldn't have.
Well, that's what some modernist theologians would have you believe. Although most people say that, for example, most of the letters we attribute to Paul, he signed those letters. Most of these books of the New Testament were essentially letters to people. Even the Gospels, which would be longer letters, but they were written to specific people for specific reasons. Luke, when you read Luke's Gospel, he's writing to Theophilus. So whether Theophilus was an actual person or it was symbolic of the Greeks of the time, don't know for sure. But the fact of the matter is that many of the letters did have names to them, the letter of Jude, the letter of James, and so there's very little dispute in terms of, well, someone by this name wrote these. Now, which James was it? Was it James the Greater, James the Less? Most scholars say James the Less wrote the letter of James. When it comes to the Gospels, you've gotten in the last 100 years or so modernist theologians who say, well, Matthew didn't really write Matthew because we don't have any of the originals because of the persecutions of the first 3 centuries of Christianity. Many of I guess all of the originals from Paul, from Matthew, John, Luke, and Mark were destroyed, or they were hidden so well that nobody ever found them again. Because that was one of the things. Not only the people were persecuted, but churches were destroyed, home churches were destroyed, all the documents and books related to Christianity were destroyed. So, yes, there is question as to exactly who wrote what book. For example, John, John, it says in Revelation, well, was that John the Apostle, or was it maybe a disciple of John's, or was there another John? There's dispute as to that, but I tell people when they say, for example, well, Matthew didn't write Matthew, I say, well, yeah, and we didn't land a man on the moon either, right? Because you have absolutely no way of knowing for sure. So my thought is, my opinion is, you go with the oldest opinions on these things, and the oldest opinions that are out there from church fathers writing in the 2nd century, 3rd century, and such. Matthew wrote Matthew, Luke wrote Luke, John wrote John, Mark wrote Mark, etc., etc. And people now are trying to throw water on those things, but it just, to me, it doesn't really fly, if that makes sense.
You saying that the early church fathers wrote the name Gospel according to John or Matthew or
No,
Mark?
what I'm saying is, for example, the Gospel of Mark. On the original, it was probably signed by Mark. He probably wrote the folks and said, put his signature or his seal on it or whatever and sent it to them. But we don't have the original documents anymore. And so when people started passing these things around and the letters were being copied to send to other churches, they would probably put on there the gospel according to Mark. Whoever the scribe was that was copying either from the original or a copy of the original or whatever. And so the early church fathers just continued passed down that tradition that, hey, this gospel that says gospel according to Mark, we believe that was the Mark according to tradition. You're talking 200-300 years after the fact. According to the tradition of the church, that's the Mark who was Peter's secretary and who also traveled with Paul. Luke, the one who wrote the Gospel of Luke, that was the Luke who was the companion of Paul. John, the Gospel of John, that was the Apostle John, and so forth. So these were traditions. They didn't start the traditions. They just carried on the traditions, the early church fathers. These traditions were from the very beginning, from the people who would have received the originals themselves. Okay?
When we rule out some gospel, like the gospel according to Thomas, are we ruling it out knowing that it came from Thomas?
No. We're ruling it out knowing that pretty sure that it did not come from Thomas, because the Gospel of Thomas doesn't appear, I think, for a couple of hundred years after the death of Christ. And we're pretty sure, I think scholars are pretty sure, not necessarily who wrote it, but about the time that it was written. And then we have, for example, with the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, and other such spurious Gospels, we have early church fathers who were saying, hey, this is brand new stuff. It came from this heretical sect over here. It is not written by the Apostle Thomas, or it is not written, there's a Gospel of Mary. It's not written by the Virgin Mary. And there's an Apocalypse Peter, and the early church fathers say, no, that's not written by him. It just came on the scene, and we're, 200, 300 years after the fact. So that's what's going on with all of those things.
Next stop, New Hampshire. Teresa is in the great state of New Hampshire. Teresa, what's your question today for John?
Hi, I wanted to go back to earlier when he was talking about apologetics.
Yes.
I had grown up in Catholic school for 12 years, like those students you were talking to. And I grew up in New England, and I moved to Florida in my mid-20s. And I almost was pulled over to the whole Protestant branch because they were able to just spin my head with, well, it says right here, and, where does it say that? And I could not defend my faith. And it left me frustrated, confused. And I'm just thinking, here we are 30 years later, and we're still in the same boat. And you said, you brought it up to the education guy there, and it didn't really go anywhere. And I was just wondering, maybe as Catholics, should we sort of require this as part of a curriculum in a Catholic school, apologetics?
I would say yes, and that was my proposal to that particular head of Catholic education was, hey, I could come up with something for you that you could, without too much trouble, insert into your curriculum and do what we call natural apologetics, like there is a God, there is a soul in 9th grade. Do Christian apologetics, which the Bible is the Word of God, there are miracles, etc., etc. In 10th, Catholic apologetics in 11th, or start in 10th grade and go 10th, 11th, 12th, however you want to do it. And it would work, and it would prepare them for exactly what you and millions of other Catholic kids are facing in this country. And he doesn't like apologetics. No, I'm not a professional educator, I was told. And so it was just, he got a little bit ugly with me. So wasn't as nice as he could have been. Let's just put it that way. So I would say go to your parish, ask for it in the PSR classes, go to your Catholic schools, ask for it in the Catholic schools. It can be done. It should be done.
1-800-585-9396 with your questions for John Martignoni on Open Line Monday.
I invite people to tune in to Women of Grace Live if they want to be encouraged, if they want to be instructed, if they want to be inspired. These opportunities present themselves not only through what we have to share on the air, but through the many calls that come in through our listeners. I am always amazed at how my own faith is edified through what our listeners share with us. I'm Janet Benkovic, inviting you to join me weekday mornings at 11 Eastern for Women of Grace on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
60 Seconds with Mother Angelica.
You know, on many of you who have not been to confession for years, I'll make a bet it's on nothing. You're ashamed. There's nothing you could tell a priest he hasn't heard before. You don't want him to know who you are. Go to another city. Go to another state. Who's going to know who you are? God knows who you are. So all of these things that we're so afraid of, people's opinion, it doesn't mean anything. You know what our dear Lord said about other people's opinion? The opinion of men mean nothing to me. I always wondered how the liberals are going to interpret that inclusive language. They wouldn't dare say the opinion of women don't mean anything to me. It must be the opinions of people. Whatever it is, opinion made nothing to him. Why?
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
EWTN Radio is drawing people of all races, nations, and walks of life to the life of Christ.
My father has a physical disability. Because of that, he cannot always make it to the Mass. Thanks to EWTN's airing the daily Mass, he's right there following along.
With satellite radio, I can listen to any show on EWTN's Catholic programming.
EWTN, truly the global Catholic radio network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Tonight on the Journey Home with Marcus Grodi, Marcus welcomes Jessica Stewart, a convert from Judaism, and she'll talk about her journey to the Catholic Church. That's tonight at 8 Eastern on EWTN television. And tomorrow on Mother Angelica Live Classics, her topic is, Do You Know God? That's tomorrow at 8 Eastern on EWTN television. Back to the phones we go. Lupe is in Lubbock, Texas, listening on Our Lady of Victory FM 102.7. Lupe, what's your question today for John? Lupe, are you there?
Hello?
Hi, Lupe. What's your question today for John Martignoni?
Hi, yes. I was calling because yesterday we went to lunch after church, and we had somebody talking about we can celebrate church at our house and not to put God in a box. That I didn't know what that meant. Like, I didn't understand that.
Well, this person obviously wasn't Catholic, correct?
Well, he was a deacon in a Protestant church.
Okay. Yeah, basically, he's talking about home churches that they did originally. Early Christianity, when it first started, where would you go to have a Mass? Well, you'd have to go to somebody's house because they didn't have churches built. They had synagogues and such, but those weren't for the Christians. They were for the Jews. The Romans had their temples and such, but again, they're not for the Christians. They were for the pagans. So where did you go before you had a large enough community with enough resources and were not being persecuted to have a public building where you gathered to have Mass? You went to people's homes. So you've had lately in the, I don't know, maybe it's been going on longer, but I know in the last 30, 40 years or so, there's been a big home church movement. Let's get back to the first century Christianity. Let's do church in our home and everything. Well, nowhere does the Bible say you have to do church in your home. So, in fact, we see the example of Jesus going to his, if you want to call it, a worship service at the synagogue. So Jesus' example is that church is held in a public place. And so for someone to say, well, you shouldn't have it, you need to have it at your house, Jesus didn't have it at his house. So,
right.
So that's, a regrettable thing to say, and it's a false thing to say. Secondly, to put Jesus in a box, put God in a box, what he's talking about is the tabernacle. Oh, we've got God in a box. Well, yes, we do. And it's an amazing thing. We have God physically present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in our church, and you don't. So you need to be in our church, Mr. Protestant Deacon, because we've got
Amen.
God there. And no, it's not like, oh, we've got him in the box and that's where it's a mystery in many respects, because we have the God of the universe who created the universe in this box, where we give special reverence to. And that box is reminiscent of, symbolic of, or maybe a in the tradition of the Holy of Holies in the temple where God resided. So, you need to ask him, number one, did Jesus worship at his house or in a public synagogue? Number two, did the Jews not, quote unquote, contain God in a box in the Ark of the Covenant, in the Holy of Holies? Well, that's the example the Catholics, we're doing exactly what Jesus did, exactly what God did in both respects. Does that help you out?
Yes, thank you so much, and God bless y'all for everything y'all do.
Well, thank you, and
Thank
God bless
you, Lupe.
too.
Appreciate that phone call. 1-800-585-9396. We've got a couple lines open for you. Norma is in Northern Virginia, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Norma, what's your question today for John?
Hi, John.
Hello, Norma.
Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to find out, I've heard different accounts of it, and I wanted to find out, do dogs or cats or your pets have souls, and do they go to heaven? I heard that if that's what it will take to make you happy, then God will allow them to be there. But others say that there is, they just cease to exist, which is what I believe, but I've kind of had different...
Well, Norma, I'm going to tell you, this is my least favorite question to answer on the air, because no matter what I say, I get hammered from somebody. But here's the thing. As I understand it, the souls of animals, all living things, humans, animals, and even plants have souls. The souls of the plants and the animals, however, are not immortal souls. And that they basically have a finite existence. And so, in that sense, you would say that no, dogs, cats, your gerbil, your pet gerbil, do not go to heaven. However, what you could also say is that every creature is an expression of God in some way, shape, or form. They reflect their Creator. And since when you get to heaven, assuming you do, you have God there, then you have the expression of God that you saw in your pet dog, your pet cat. That's, as part of God, an expression of God, you may be able to experience in some way, shape, or form what you felt with that pet. I imagine you would feel way happier than you ever felt, petting your dog or your cat, being in heaven. Now, will you have a direct experience of that animal? Again, I would say probably not. But, you could, I guess, in some way, shape, or form, through the experience of God, experience what's going on, currently with your dog or cat, the feelings that you feel, the fact that, again, they are creatures of God, created by God, okay?
Okay. Well, thank you. That helps a lot. That was my point of view on it. Someone was arguing that there's just no way. But well, thank you very much. You have a great day.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Next up is Kathy in the great state of New Hampshire, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Kathy, what's your question today for John?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. I can't get into probably detail about this, but maybe a little Freemasonry 101 and maybe a resource I could go to. I do have a brother-in-law who's a Freemason and my husband, they're Protestant, who I tried to talk to him about. He flipped out on me, so there's nothing wrong with the Freemasons, and I can't find any information to find out why they're not.
Okay.
Essentially, why is Freemasonry bad?
Okay, why is Freemasonry bad? Okay, I was having trouble hearing you. So this is the thing, Kathy. It's bad because there are articles within Freemasonry, and I haven't done a lot of study, any extensive study on Freemasonry. It's been a while since I've had a question, so I haven't looked at it late in a while. But there are things in Freemasonry that are antithetical to Christianity. Now, maybe the Freemasons who are on the in the first levels of Freemasonry may not realize that, because I've run across Catholics. Oh yeah, I'm a Freemason. It's like, well, your church tells you you're not supposed to be. But what I can say to you, I can give you a good resource. It's a very good resource on Freemasonry that will explain it, and it even cites some papal encyclicals, or at least one papal encyclical that I know of on Freemasonry. If you go to newadvent.org, newadvent.org, and across the top you'll see a bunch of letters. There's a Catholic encyclopedia there, and you just click on either F for Freemasonry or M for Masonry. I think they have it under Freemasonry. And go down and they will have a very extensive article on Freemasonry, the problems the church has with it, and more reading that you could do on it if you're so inclined, okay?
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
To find information on this topic.
Yeah, but I've read this article before, but like I said, it's been a few years, and I just remember thinking, wow, this is really thorough and just very, very good article there at newadvent.org.
Oh, perfect.
All right, thanks, Kathy.
Doctor.
Appreciate the phone call. 1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. We've still got time for your questions for John Martignoni. 1-800-585-9396. Next up is Pat in Deerfield Beach, Florida, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Pat, what's your question today for John Martignoni?
Hey, John, my question is a question I have asked many, many times of many, many people, and the reason I'm asking you today this question is because to date I have not gotten an answer that I felt was totally and completely compelling. So here it is. I'm a lifelong Catholic. I have served as a lector in a couple of very large Catholic churches, and I've always been bothered by the fact that whether it's my church or as I travel, I go to other Catholic churches, some Catholic churches present the Eucharist under the species of bread and bread alone to the congregation, where others will present it very passionately under the auspices of bread and wine, body and blood. And I have never understood, based upon the Last Supper, where Christ himself said, take this and eat it, this is my body. Take this and drink of it, this is my blood. How can any of our churches only present one species and say, that's good enough? Can you help me with this?
Okay, well, number one, they can do that because the church says it's okay to do that. And the reason the church says it's okay to do that is because when you take communion under either species, you are receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. Even if you were to just receive the host, or if you were just to receive from the cup, It's not, oh, well, I only received the host, so I've only received the body, but not the blood. No. When you receive the host, you've received body, blood, soul, and divinity. And there are people who have wheat allergies or what is it? Is it celiac?
Celiac disease.
Disease that makes them, their body is intolerant of wheat. And gluten, thank you. And so they can't receive the host, so they make special arrangements just to receive from the cup. And so when they receive just from the cup, it's not, oh, well, I received the blood but not the body. You receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ in every drop of the blood, in every crumb of the host. And so that's why the church can do that. Now, yes, when you don't offer under both species, you can take away from some of the symbolism, which it's not symbolic in terms of the transubstantiation aspect, but there is symbolism involved in the fact that you're right. Jesus said, take this, eat of it, take this, drink of it. So that symbolism is is removed a bit. You also take away from the symbolism of Jesus's blood. This is basically a participation in the crucifixion. And so you take away some of the symbolism of that by not separating the body and the blood in that instance with the host and the cup. But for the purpose of receiving Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, that is accomplished by receiving either of the species. Does that help you out?
Yeah, it helps, but I guess can you speculate for me for just a second? What would be the compelling argument of a particular Catholic church to say, no, we're only going to do the bread here, but the Catholic Church across town, we're going to do body and blood of Christ. What's the compelling reason that a church of ours would cut out the blood of Christ? Why not be uniformed? Why not do it?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and John, you can confirm this. You would be hard-pressed anywhere outside the United States to find a communal cup offered.
I think that's correct, yes. For example, large papal masses. Good luck passing the cup around and having enough wine for all those people. So there's one pretty blatant example. But when you come down to the parish level, it could be something as simple as, hey, we don't have enough people to volunteer to be extraordinary ministers of communion. So, or you could have, for hundreds of years, because of irregularities that had occurred with communion and giving under both species, the church only allowed communion to be offered under one species.
Only because it could only be distributed by the celebrants.
Exactly. So people are saying, well, this is how it had been for hundreds of years, so let's do it that way. There could be, I would say those are a couple of reasons. I wouldn't say that they are, fully inclusive of all the reasons. But what I would do if I were you is find a pastor who only offers under one species and ask him, say, what's the reason you do it that way? But those are a couple of the general reasons that are possible.
1-800-585-9396. Still time for your phone calls at 1-800-585-9396. John Martignoni, our apologist extraordinaire, is in the house. Open Line Monday rolls on.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
St. Leo the Great, he was responsible for defending the fully God, fully man idea of Christ. It's a high Christology, as we would say. He came up with this thing called the hypostatic union. That sounds like a Christian band.
Yeah, it does.
With the opening act, Moon Pie or something.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
tomorrow on EWTN Radio. Open Line host Barbara McWiggin takes all your calls on pro-life issues, 3 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Entering the home stretch on an Open Line Monday. Next stop, San Antonio, Texas. Patrick is listening on Guadalupe Radio, FM 89.7. Patrick, you're on with John Martignoni.
Hello, John. How you doing today?
Doing all right. How about yourself, Patrick?
Very well. I had a question. Recently I've been inspired to read the book of Ecclesiastes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
You are.
But how does, to sum up that whole book, how would you sum that up? It talks so much about like it's useless or worthless, and just sum up the whole book there.
Well, what's the opening? Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under? Basically, I think the book is, it seems in many ways that life could be useless. Because that's the question, the age-old question, the perennial question, why am I here? What's my purpose? Well, in many respects, it looks as if maybe life is useless. Maybe I don't have a purpose. Well, without God, you don't. If there is no God, then everything is just vanity. It's all vanity. You think you have purpose? Well, no, you don't. You're just a cosmic accident, although that's not exactly what it says there. But essentially, even if you think there is purpose to life, if you don't have God in your life, there really is no purpose. Because you're not going to be spending. You are created to spend eternity with God in heaven. That's why he made you. That's your purpose in life. And if you reject that purpose, if you reject God in your life, then you can have all the money, all the wealth, all the popularity, all the fame, whatever. And it's all vanity, because you will be nothing but dust 100 years from now. So that's, we're trying to get through here and say, hey, even though it looks bleak, again, it's not necessarily. And, at the end it says, being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging proverbs with great care. The sayings of the wise are like goats, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings by which are given by one shepherd. Making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So that's what the book is saying. Without God, if you don't fear God, if you don't keep his commandments, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil, then everything else is vanity. That's the essence of the book, okay?
When we're working here and stuff and providing for our family and stuff, to kind of sum it up, the family, the closeness there kind of matters most of all, and stuff, how we treat one another, and with family most probably important.
Absolutely, and as you're doing that, that is part of your vocation from God. As a married man with children, you care for your family, and it says in 1 Timothy 5:8, one of the duties of a man of God is to care for his family. And by doing that, you are hopefully bringing yourself closer to God and bringing your family closer to God. So you care for your family financially, emotionally, physically, etc. But most importantly, you care for your family spiritually. So that's what the whole thing's about.
Next stop, Jacksonville, Florida. Greg, listening on Queen of Peace Radio, AM 1460. Greg, what's your question today for John?
Hey, I'm actually calling to ask, just heard you say the duty of man was to keep the commandments. And the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath holy is a commandment, which the Sabbath is the Saturday, the seventh day of the week. So at what point did man actually change God's Sabbath? And why are we following God's Sabbath on the Sunday and not the Sabbath?
Well, you can see it in the Acts of the Apostles, where it talks about they got together on the Lord's Day. Well, what's the Lord's Day? It's Sunday for them. Why? Because the Lord rose from the dead on Sunday. And so in the beginning, the apostles actually kept 2 days of the week where they would gather in the synagogue on Saturday along with their fellow Jews. But then on Sunday, they would meet with what were also their fellow Jews who were now Christians in their homes. And they would, as it says in Acts 2, they would, they would devote themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread, the Eucharist, and the prayers. What prayers? The Eucharistic prayers, the prayers of the Mass. That's Acts 2:42. They would do that on Sunday. The Sunday was the first day of the new creation. It was the day of the Lord who had died, and it's the day he rose from the dead and broke the bonds of sin for us. So we became that new creation, or had access to that new creation. So why do Christians worship on Sunday? Because that's the way the apostles did it from the very beginning of the church. And again, just go through the Acts of the Apostles and look for Lord's Day, and you'll see 2 or 3 references to them gathering on the Lord's Day.
My apologies to Father Michael and Patrick, but we are flat out of time on an open line Monday. John, where can they find more of what you do?
BibleChristianSociety.com is our website, BibleChristianSociety.com. Free CDs on various topics of the Catholic faith and apologetics, a free apologetics newsletter, and free downloads as well. It's all free.
Thanks so much for your time, as always, John. On behalf of our host, John Martignoni, producer Elena Rodriguez, call screener Matt Kubensky, I'm Jack Williams, thanking you for taking some time out of your day to join us. Back at it tomorrow with our pro-life warrior, Barbara McGuigan. Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers fills in for Father Mitch on Wednesday, Father Larry on Thursday, and Colin Donovan on Friday. Until we get together tomorrow, God bless.